Lisa Rodriguez sat in the corner of the spaceship's practice room, her fingers moving across the guitar strings. The sound was soft and gentle, but she could hear the tremor in her own voice. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow she would stand before aliens from across the galaxy and try to prove that humans belonged among the stars. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the hallways of the UES Harmony, checking on his crew and passengers. This was not like any mission he had commanded before. Instead of soldiers or scientists, his ship carried artists, musicians, and performers. The weight of representing all of humanity pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. The ship was 3 days away from Kepler-7, the massive space station where the galactic cultural exchange would take place. Every year, different species from across the galaxy came together to share their art, their music, and their stories. This was the first time humans had been invited to participate. Lisa looked up as the captain appeared in the doorway. She had been practicing the same song for hours, trying to get it perfect. Her hands were starting to hurt, but she could not stop. Not when so much was riding on her performance. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked, stepping into the room. He had asked the same question to every performer on the ship, but Lisa's answer mattered the most. She was their best hope, even though she had never performed anywhere bigger than the subway stations back home. Scared, Lisa admitted, setting down her guitar. "I keep thinking about all those alien species out there. They've been making music for thousands of years longer than we have. What if I'm not good enough?" Jake sat down across from her, his expression serious but kind. "You know why we chose you, right? It wasn't because you went to fancy music schools or won big competitions. It was because when you played on those street corners, you made people stop and listen. You made them feel something." Lisa nodded, but the doubt was still there in her eyes. She had grown up in a small town, learning to play guitar from her grandfather. When she moved to the city, she had no money for concerts or recording studios. The streets became her stage, and the passing crowds became her audience. She learned to play songs that would make busy people slow down, that would make strangers drop coins into her guitar case. Ambassador Kate Sullivan was in the main conference room, reviewing the files on the other species that would be at the exchange. The Trilaxians were known for their mathematical approach to music, creating songs based on complex equations and formulas. The resonants were living crystals that could produce sounds no organic being could match. The Zephyrians had been making art since before humans discovered fire. Kate had fought hard to get humans included in the exchange. Many in the galactic community saw humans as too young, too primitive to contribute anything meaningful to the cultural gathering. This was their chance to prove those critics wrong. The ambassador walked to the observation deck, where several of the human performers were watching the stars. Carlos Mendoza was sketching in his notebook, trying to capture the way the light moved across the ship's hull. Maya Patel was practicing her dance moves, her body flowing like water even in the artificial gravity of the ship. "Are you ready for this?" Kate asked Carlos, who looked up from his drawing. "As ready as I can be," he replied. "I've been working on a series of paintings that show what Earth looks like from space. I want them to understand what our world means to us." Maya stopped her practice and joined the conversation. "I've been thinking about the stories my grandmother used to tell me about classical Indian dance. Each movement has meaning. Each gesture tells a story. I hope I can share that with them." Kate smiled, but she could see the nervousness in their faces. These were talented people, but they were about to face competition unlike anything they had ever experienced. The other species had advantages that humans could not match. They had longer lifespans to perfect their crafts, alien senses that could perceive things humans could not, and technologies that could create art in ways humans had never imagined. Back in the practice room, Lisa was playing again. This time, she was not practicing a prepared song. Instead, she was just letting her fingers find their own way across the strings. The melody that emerged was sad and hopeful at the same time, like a prayer whispered into the darkness. Jake listened from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. He had heard Lisa play many times during the journey, But this was different. This was not a performance or a practice session. This was Lisa expressing something that had no words, something that came from deep inside her heart. The music filled the small room and seemed to spread through the ship itself. Other crew members stopped what they were doing and listened. Even the ship's computers seemed to hum a little quieter, as if they too were affected by the sound. When Lisa finished, the silence that followed was profound. Jake realized that he had been holding his breath without knowing it. There was something about the way she played that went beyond technical skill or training. It was raw and honest in a way that touched something fundamental in everyone who heard it. "That was beautiful," Jake said quietly. Lisa looked surprised, as if she had forgotten anyone else was there. "I was just playing around. It's not a real song or anything." "Maybe that's what makes it so powerful," Jake replied. "It's not trying to be anything other than what it is." The next morning, the UES Harmony approached Kepler-7. The space station was enormous, bigger than any city on Earth. Ships from dozens of different species were docked at its many ports. The sight was both inspiring and intimidating. Lisa stood at the observation window, watching as they drew closer. Somewhere inside that station, alien beings were preparing to judge whether humans deserved a place in the galactic community. The weight of that responsibility felt overwhelming. Kate Sullivan joined her at the window. "Remember," the ambassador said, "you're not just representing yourself tomorrow. You're representing all of humanity. But don't let that pressure change who you are. Be yourself, and let your music speak for itself." Lisa nodded, gripping her guitar case tighter. Tomorrow, she would find out if a street musician from Earth could impress beings from across the galaxy. Tomorrow, she would discover just how good she really was. The docking bay of Kepler-7 was unlike anything Lisa had ever seen. Creatures of all shapes and sizes moved through the massive space, their alien forms casting strange shadows under the bright lights. Some walked on legs like humans, while others floated through the air or moved on surfaces that defied gravity. The air itself seemed to shimmer with different atmospheres mixed together to accommodate all the visiting species. Lisa followed Ambassador Kate Sullivan through the crowds, her guitar case clutched tightly in her hands. Captain Jake Morrison walked beside them, his uniform crisp and his expression alert. He was constantly scanning the area, still thinking like a military officer even in this peaceful setting. "Stay close," Kate whispered to the group of human performers. "This place can be overwhelming at first." Carlos Mendoza was already pulling out his sketchbook, trying to capture the incredible sights around them. Maya Patel moved gracefully through the crowd, her dancer's training helping her navigate the busy space. But Lisa felt lost and small among all these advanced beings. A tall, thin creature approached them. Its skin was pale blue and seemed to glow softly from within. When it spoke, the words came out in perfect English, though its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome to Kepler-7, the being said. "I'm Coordinator Zinto. We have prepared quarters for the human delegation. Please follow me." They walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The walls were covered with art from dozens of different worlds. Lisa saw paintings that seemed to move on their own, sculptures that changed shape as she watched, and displays of light that danced in patterns too complex for her mind to follow. "The preliminary presentations begin tomorrow," Zinto explained as they walked. "Each delegation will have the opportunity to showcase their cultural achievements to a small audience of judges and observers. This will help us determine the schedule for the main competition." Kate nodded, but Lisa could see the tension in the ambassador's shoulders. Everything depended on making a good first impression. Their quarters were comfortable but simple. Lisa's room had a bed, a desk, and a small area where she could practice. The walls were transparent, offering a view of the space station's interior gardens where alien plants grew in impossible colors. That evening, there was a welcome reception for all the visiting delegations. Lisa dressed in her best clothes, which suddenly seemed very plain compared to what she saw around her. The Trilaxians wore robes that seemed to be made of pure mathematics, with equations and formulas flowing across the fabric like living text. The residents appeared as walking crystals, their bodies reflecting light in beautiful patterns. Reception hall was filled with the sounds of different languages and the music of various worlds. Lisa tried to stay close to the other humans, but she found herself drawn to the performances happening throughout the room. In one corner, a group of Trilaxians was demonstrating their mathematical music. They used instruments that looked like complex calculators, creating sounds based on numerical sequences. The result was precise and perfectly balanced, but it felt cold to Lisa's ears. Near the center of the room, several resonants were producing a harmonic display. Their crystal bodies vibrated at different frequencies, creating sounds that seemed to come from inside Lisa's own mind. The music was hauntingly beautiful, but it was also alien in a way that made her feel disconnected. Impressive, are they not? A voice said behind her. Lisa turned to see a tall, elegant being with silver skin and large, dark eyes. Its movements were fluid and graceful, like a dancer who had been practicing for centuries. I am Cultural Minister Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire, the being continued. And you are one of the human performers, I assume? Yes, Lisa replied, suddenly feeling very young and inexperienced. I'm Lisa Rodriguez. I play guitar and sing. Veltar's expression was polite but dismissive. How charming! Guitar, you say? Such a primitive instrument. We have similar devices in our museums, relics from our own ancient past. Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she tried to keep her voice steady. Maybe it's primitive, but it can make beautiful music. I am sure it can, Veltar replied, though his tone suggested he did not believe it. We look forward to your presentation tomorrow. It will be educational for all of us. The Zephyrian Minister moved away, leaving Lisa feeling smaller than ever. She looked around the room at all the advanced beings and their incredible art, and wondered what she was doing here. Kate Sullivan appeared at her side, having noticed the conversation. Don't let him get to you, the ambassador said quietly. He's testing you, trying to shake your confidence. Maybe he's right, Lisa said. Look at all this. These beings have been creating art for thousands of years. They have technology and abilities we can't even imagine. What can I possibly offer them? Before Kate could answer, Carlos joined them. His sketchbook was filled with drawings of the alien art forms he had seen. Did you see the light sculptures the gas giant dwellers created? They're using controlled plasma to paint in 3 dimensions. It's incredible. Maya nodded, but she looked troubled. I tried talking to some of the other dancers. They have extra limbs, or they can manipulate gravity, or they exist partially in other dimensions. How can human movement compete with that? The doubt was spreading through the human delegation like a disease. Even Captain Morrison looked concerned as he watched his people losing confidence. The next morning came too quickly. Lisa barely slept, her mind racing with worries and fears. She had practiced her songs hundreds of times, but now they all seemed inadequate. The preliminary presentation was held in a small auditorium with about 50 beings in the audience. Representatives from each major species sat in the front rows, their alien faces showing various degrees of interest and skepticism. Carlos went first, displaying his paintings on large screens. The images of Earth were beautiful and moving, showing landscapes and cityscapes from their home world. But Lisa could see the judges taking notes with expressions that seemed polite but unimpressed. Maya performed next, her classical Indian dance telling the story of creation and renewal. Her movements were precise and meaningful, each gesture carrying deep cultural significance. But some of the alien observers seemed confused by the limitations of her single human form. Then it was Lisa's turn. She walked onto the small stage, her guitar in her hands and her heart pounding in her chest. The lights were bright, and she could barely make out the faces in the audience. She had planned to play one of her more complex pieces, something that would show off her technical skills. But as she looked out at the sea of alien faces, she changed her mind. Instead, she began to play the simple melody she had created on the ship, the one that had come from her heart rather than her training. The song was soft and gentle, built around basic chords and a simple progression. There were no mathematical formulas or technological enhancements. It was just Lisa, her guitar, and the emotion she put into every note. When she finished, the silence in the room was complete. Lisa looked up at the judges, trying to read their expressions. Some seemed curious, others appeared confused. A few looked almost bored. Finally, one of the Trilaxian judges spoke. "Interesting technique," he said, making notes on his electronic tablet. "Very basic. The harmonic structure is quite simple, and the emotional content, while present, lacks the sophistication we typically expect." A resonant judge added her thoughts, her crystal form pulsing softly as she spoke. "The acoustic instrument produces limited frequency ranges. The performance was adequate for such primitive technology." Lisa felt her heart sink. She had given everything she had, and it was not enough. As she left the stage, she wondered if Veltar had been right. Maybe humans really were not ready for this level of cultural exchange. Kate Sullivan met her backstage, putting a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You did well," the ambassador said, but Lisa could hear the disappointment in her voice. "No, I didn't," Lisa replied. "I wasn't good enough." None of us were. As the human delegation returned to their quarters, the weight of failure pressed down on them all. Tomorrow would bring the announcement of which species would be selected for the main competition. Lisa was already preparing herself for the disappointment of being sent home. Lisa woke up to the sound of someone knocking on her door. The artificial daylight streaming through her window told her it was morning, but she had no idea what time it really was on the space station. Sleep had come in bits and pieces, broken by dreams of alien judges shaking their heads in disappointment. "Lisa, you need to come to the main conference room," Captain Morrison's voice called through the door. "They're making the announcements." She dressed quickly and joined the other humans in the hallway. Everyone looked tired and nervous. Carlos had dark circles under his eyes, and Maya kept wringing her hands. Even Ambassador Sullivan seemed more tense than usual. The conference room was packed with delegates from all the different species. Lisa found herself squeezed between a tall, green-skinned being and something that looked like a walking tree. The air was thick with different scents and the sound of various languages being translated in real time. Coordinator Zinto stood at the front of the room, his pale blue skin glowing brighter than usual. "Thank you all for your patience," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "After careful consideration of yesterday's presentations, we have selected the species that will participate in the main competition." Lisa's heart pounded as he began reading the list. The Trilaxians were selected, of course. Their mathematical music was technically perfect. The resonants were chosen for their crystal harmonies. The gas giant dwellers made the list for their plasma light art. One by one, the expected names were called. "And finally," Zinto said, pausing dramatically, "the human delegation has been selected to participate." Lisa blinked in surprise. Around her, the other humans looked equally shocked. They had made it to the main competition despite their simple presentations. But before anyone could celebrate, Cultural Minister Veltar stood up from his seat near the front of the room. His silver skin seemed to shimmer with displeasure. "I object to this decision," he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. The human presentations were adequate at best. They lacked the sophistication and technical mastery that this competition demands. Zinto's glow dimmed slightly. The preliminary judging was based on cultural significance and artistic merit, not just technical ability. "Then let us test that." "Merit properly," Veltar replied, his dark eyes scanning the room. "I propose a formal challenge. Let each species present their finest artists in a competition that will determine not just artistic ranking, but cultural standing within the galactic alliance." The room fell silent. Lisa could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes on her and her fellow humans. This was not just about art anymore. This was about whether humanity would be accepted as equals in the galactic community. "What are you suggesting?" Ambassador Sullivan asked, standing up to face the Zephyrian minister. A traditional contest of worthiness, Veltar replied. Each species selects one representative. They will perform before the full assembly of the Galactic Cultural Exchange. The losing species will be relegated to observer status for the next century. Lisa felt the blood drain from her face. Observer status meant no voting rights, no participation in galactic decisions, no real place in the interstellar community. It would set humanity back by 100 years. That seems rather extreme, Kate said, but her voice lacked confidence. Not at all, Veltar replied smoothly. If humans truly belong here, they should be able to prove it. If not, perhaps they need more time to develop their cultural achievements before joining us as equals. The other species began murmuring among themselves. Lisa could see some nodding in agreement with Veltar's proposal. Others seemed uncertain, but none spoke up in support of humanity. Zintul looked uncomfortable with the situation, but he could not ignore the formal challenge. The contest of worthiness is a legitimate tradition, he admitted. If the human delegation accepts, we will proceed with the competition tomorrow. All eyes turned to Ambassador Sullivan. Lisa watched as the older woman weighed their options. They could refuse the challenge and accept a lesser status, or they could risk everything on a single performance. We accept, Kate said firmly. The room erupted in conversation as the different species discussed this unexpected turn of events. Lisa felt like she was going to be sick. Everything now depended on one person, one performance. After the announcement, the human delegation gathered in their quarters to discuss strategy. The weight of the decision hung over them like a dark cloud. This is my fault, Kate said, pacing back and forth. I should have found a way to avoid this challenge. No, Captain Morrison replied. Veltar was looking for any excuse to put us in this position. If we had refused, we would have looked weak. At least this way, we have a fighting chance. But who's going to represent us? Carlos asked. We all did our best yesterday, but none of us really impressed the judges. The room fell quiet as everyone considered the question. Maya was an excellent dancer, but her human form limited what she could do compared to beings with multiple limbs or gravity control. Carlos was a talented painter, but his two-dimensional work seemed simple next to the multi-dimensional art of other species. I'll do it, Lisa said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She was the youngest member of their group, with the least formal training. Her guitar was ancient technology compared to the sophisticated instruments used by other species. Lisa, are you sure? Kate asked gently. This is a huge responsibility. I know, Lisa replied, her voice growing stronger. But I have an idea. Yesterday, I tried to impress them with technique and complexity. I tried to be something I'm not. But maybe that's not what we should be doing. What do you mean? Jake asked. Lisa stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the alien gardens. All these species have spent thousands of years perfecting their art. They've made it technically perfect, mathematically precise, technologically advanced. But maybe they've lost something along the way. What have they lost? Maya asked. The heart, Lisa said, turning back to face them. Did you notice how cold their music sounded? How distant their art felt? They focused so much on being perfect that they've forgotten what art is really about. Kate frowned thoughtfully. You think human art has something theirs doesn't. I think human art has something theirs used to have, Lisa replied. We're not the most advanced species here. We don't have the best technology or the longest history. But we still remember that art is supposed to make you feel something. Carlos nodded slowly. You're talking about emotion. Raw, honest emotion. Exactly. Lisa said, they've been judging us by their standards, trying to measure our technique and complexity. But what if we showed them something they can't measure? What if we showed them something they've forgotten how to create? Captain Morrison leaned forward. That's a big gamble, Lisa. If you're wrong, if they don't respond to that kind of approach, we lose everything. We're going to lose anyway if I try to compete with them on their terms, Lisa replied. A human with a guitar can't out-technique A crystal being that is music. But maybe I can remind them why they started making music in the first place. The room was quiet as everyone considered her words. Finally, Ambassador Sullivan spoke up. "What do you need from us?" Lisa smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. "I need you to trust me. And I need you to help me understand what these beings were like before they became so advanced. Every species here must have started somewhere. They must have had simpler times when their art came from the heart instead of from formulas and equations." "I can research their cultural histories," Kate said. "Find out what their early art forms were like. And I can help you practice," Maya added. "Not technique, but presence. How to command a stage and connect with an audience." Carlos nodded. "I'll document everything. If this works, if this changes how they see us, someone needs to record it." Captain Morrison stood up. "Then it's settled. Lisa represents humanity tomorrow. We have less than 24 hours to prepare for the most important performance in human history." As the meeting broke up, Lisa felt a mixture of terror and excitement. Tomorrow, she would stand before the greatest artists in the galaxy and galaxy. Try to show them something they had forgotten. She would try to prove that sometimes the most powerful art comes not from perfect technique, but from an honest heart. The question that had been haunting her since she arrived at the station took a new meaning. How good was she really? Tomorrow, they would all find out. The main auditorium of Kepler 7 was the largest space Lisa had ever seen. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the curved seating areas that rose up like a mountain around the central stage. The air hummed with excitement and tension, as delegates from every major species waited for the contest of worthiness to begin. Lisa sat backstage with her guitar, trying to calm her racing heart. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the other competitors preparing for their performances. The Trilaxian representative was running mathematical calculations, his instruments beeping and clicking as they processed complex equations. The resident contestant was tuning her crystal body, creating haunting notes that seemed to vibrate through the station itself. Ambassador Sullivan had spent the entire night researching the cultural histories of the competing species. What she found was both encouraging and sad. Every civilization had started with simple emotional art forms. The Trilaxians once sang folk songs around campfires. The residents had created music from the natural vibrations of their crystal caves. Even the advanced Zephyrians had begun with basic instruments and heartfelt melodies. "They all started like us," Kate had told Lisa that morning. But somewhere along the way, they lost that connection to their origins. They became so focused on advancing their art that they forgot why they created it in the first place. Now Lisa was about to test that theory in front of the entire galaxy. She looked down at her simple acoustic guitar, its worn wood and metal strings seeming primitive compared to the advanced technology being used by the other competitors. But this instrument had been with her through everything. It had been her companion on lonely street corners and in empty subway stations. It knew her better than any person ever had. Maya Patel appeared beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Remember what we practice," she said. "Don't perform for them. Perform with them. Let them feel what you're feeling." "Captain." Morrison checked his watch. 5 minutes until showtime. "Are you ready?" Lisa nodded, though her mouth was dry and her hands were shaking slightly. "As ready as I'll ever be." The competition began with the gas giant dwellers. Their representative was a being of pure energy who created art by manipulating plasma and electromagnetic fields. The performance was spectacular, filling the auditorium with colors and patterns that defied description. Streams of controlled fire danced through the air while magnetic fields created shapes that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The audience was amazed. Even Lisa had to admit it was the most technically impressive thing she had ever seen. But as she watched, she noticed something. The performance was perfect, but it felt cold. There was no emotion behind the beautiful display, no personal connection. Between the artist and the art. Next became the Trilaxian master. His music was based on mathematical principles that most beings in the audience could not even understand. The melodies followed precise formulas, and every note was calculated to create perfect harmonic relationships. The result was flawless. Music that demonstrated centuries of theoretical advancement. Again, the audience responded with appreciation and respect. The technical mastery was undeniable. But Lisa felt the same emptiness she had noticed in the previous performance. It was music created by the mind rather than the heart. The resonant representative took the stage next. As a living crystal, she was able to produce sounds that no organic being could match. Her body vibrated at frequencies that created music inside the listeners' minds, bypassing their ears entirely. The performance was alien and beautiful, unlike anything most species had ever experienced. The applause was thunderous. Lisa began to doubt her strategy. These performances were incredible displays of what advanced civilizations could achieve. How could her simple human music compete with such sophisticated art? Finally, it was her turn. As she walked onto the massive stage, the auditorium fell silent. Thousands of alien eyes watched her every move. The stage lights were so bright that she could barely see the audience. But she could feel their presence like a weight pressing down on her. Lisa sat down on the simple stool that had been placed in the center of the stage. She adjusted her guitar and looked out at the sea of beings waiting to judge her. In the front row, she could see Cultural Minister Veltar watching with an expression of polite skepticism. She had planned to start with a speech to explain what she was trying to do. But as she sat there under those lights, surrounded by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, words seemed inadequate. Instead, she began to play. The first notes were soft and hesitant, like someone learning to speak for the first time. Lisa started with a simple melody, one that her grandfather had taught her when she was a child. It was a song about leaving home and the sadness that comes with growing up. The chords were basic, the progression predictable, but she poured her heart into every note. As she played, something unexpected began to happen. The resonance in the audience started to vibrate softly, their crystal bodies responding to frequencies they had never encountered before. These were not the pure mathematical tones they were used to. These were sounds that carried the weight of human experience, the imperfection and beauty of a species still learning about itself. Lisa began to sing. Her voice was not technically perfect. It cracked slightly on the high notes, and there was a roughness to it that came from years of performing in subway tunnels and on street corners. But there was something in that imperfection that spoke to the deepest parts of the listeners' minds. She sang about loneliness and hope, about the fear of being small in a vast universe, about the courage it takes to reach for something better. These were universal experiences, feelings that every sentient being had encountered at some point in their development. The Trilaxians in the audience began to shift uncomfortably. Their mathematical minds were trying to analyze what they were hearing, but the emotional content refused to fit into their formulas. They found themselves remembering their own ancient songs, the simple melodies their ancestors had created before music became a science. As Lisa's performance continued, she began to weave in elements from different human musical traditions. She played rhythms that came from the heartbeat of her species, melodies that had been passed down through generations of farmers and workers and dreamers. Each element was simple on its own, but together they created something that was unmistakably human. The gas giant dwellers, beings of pure energy, found themselves drawn into patterns they could not categorize. They were used to controlling forces of nature, but this music was controlled by something even more powerful, the force of genuine emotion expressed through sound. Even the advanced Zephyrians began to feel something they had not experienced in centuries. Deep in their perfectly ordered minds, memories stirred of their own primitive past. When their art had come from the heart instead of from technology, Lisa played for 20 minutes, moving from song to song without pause. She played blues that spoke of suffering and resilience. She played folk songs that told stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. She played ballads about love and loss. about dreams deferred and hopes fulfilled. But it was not just the songs themselves that moved the audience. It was the way Lisa connected with each note, the way she made her guitar an extension of her own voice, her own soul. This was not a performance in the traditional sense. This was one being sharing the most intimate parts of herself with thousands of strangers. As the final notes faded away, the auditorium fell into complete silence. Lisa sat on her stool, breathing hard, her heart pounding from the intensity of what she had just shared. She looked out at the audience, trying to read their expressions. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, something extraordinary began to occur. One by one, beings throughout the auditorium began to make sounds. Not applause, but vocalizations that came from deep within themselves. The Trilaxians hummed melodies they had not heard since childhood. The resonance created harmonies that had no mathematical basis. Even the energy beings pulsed with rhythms that matched their own forgotten heartbeats. Cultural Minister Veltar sat in stunned silence, his elegant face showing emotions he had not felt in decades. For the first time in his long life, he understood what his species had given up in their pursuit of perfect art. They had traded their souls for sophistication. Lisa stood up slowly, her legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. She had done what she came to do. She had shown the galaxy what human art could be. Whether it was enough remained to be seen. The strange sounds filling the auditorium continued for several minutes after Lisa finished playing. It was not applause in any traditional sense, but something deeper and more primal. Beings who had not expressed raw emotion in centuries found themselves making sounds they did not understand but could not stop. Cultural Minister Veltar was the first to recover his composure. He stood slowly, his silver skin less bright than usual, his elegant features showing confusion and something that might have been pain. When he spoke, his voice carried across the vast space, translated instantly for all the different species. "What have you done?" he asked, and there was no anger in his voice, only bewilderment. Lisa looked at him from the stage, still holding her guitar. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady when she replied, "I reminded you of something you forgot." "Impossible," Veltar said, but even as he spoke the word, his voice cracked. "We have evolved beyond such primitive responses. Our art is perfected, refined, superior to anything your young species could create." "Your art is perfect," Lisa agreed. "But perfect for what? To show how smart you are? To prove how advanced your technology has become? When was the last time your music made you cry?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the auditorium, beings began to shift uncomfortably. The Trilaxians looked at their mathematical instruments with new eyes, suddenly seeing them as cold and lifeless. The resonance felt their crystal bodies vibrating with frequencies that had no formula, no logical explanation. An elderly Trilaxian in the upper seating area suddenly stood up. His voice was rough and unused, as if he had not spoken in years. "I remember," he said, and every being in the auditorium turned to listen. "I remember when we sang around fires on the cold nights, simple songs about the stars and our place beneath them. We stopped singing those songs when we learned to calculate the stars instead." A resonance near the stage began to pulse with soft light. "I remember the cave harmonies," she said, her crystal voice now warm instead of cold. "Before we learned to control our frequencies, we used to sing with the natural vibrations of our world. The mountains themselves would join our music." More voices began to speak up from around the auditorium. A gas giant dweller admitted to missing the gentle dances of energy that his people had performed before they learned to weaponize plasma. A representative from the plant-like Verdani spoke of ancient growing songs that had been replaced by scientific agricultural formulas. Veltar listened to each confession with growing distress. His perfect world of advanced art was crumbling around him, replaced by memories of simpler times that suddenly seemed more valuable than all the technical achievements of the past 1,000 years. "This is madness," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We cannot go backward." We cannot abandon everything we have learned and achieved. No one is asking you to abandon anything, Lisa said, stepping forward on the stage. I'm not saying your advanced art is bad. Those performances today were incredible. The gas giant dweller created things I could never imagine. The Trilaxium music was more complex than anything humans have ever made. The resonant performance was beautiful beyond description. Then what are you saying? Veltar asked. Lisa took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might determine the future of human participation in galactic culture. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, you forgot why you started making art in the first place. You got so good at the how that you lost track of the why. She gestured to her simple guitar. This instrument is thousands of years old in design. It has not changed much since my ancestors first strung animal gut across hollow wood. By your standards, it is primitive and limited, but it can still do something that all your advanced technology cannot. What is that? Asked a voice from the audience. It can make you remember what it feels like to be alive, Lisa replied. Auditorium fell silent again, but this time it was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of beings contemplating a truth they had not considered in a very long time. Coordinator Zinto, who had been watching the entire exchange with growing amazement, finally found his voice. The contest of worthiness was meant to determine which species had achieved the highest level of cultural development, he said. But perhaps we have been measuring the wrong things. Veltar turned to face the coordinator, his expression desperate. You cannot seriously be suggesting that primitive emotion is superior to centuries of artistic evolution. I am suggesting, Zinto replied carefully, that evolution without purpose is merely change. And change without meaning is just motion. The other competitors began to understand what was happening. The gas giant dweller who had performed first approached the stage. When it spoke, its energy form pulsed with new patterns that seemed warmer than before. Your music did something to us, it said to Lisa. It made us feel things we thought we had outgrown. But now I wonder if we outgrew them, or if we simply forgot how to access them. The Trilaxian master nodded slowly. My calculations show that your harmonic progressions should not work. They violate several principles of mathematical music theory. Yet they created responses in the audience that my perfect equations never achieved. The resonant contestant stepped forward as well. I have been studying your performance with my internal resonance analyzers, she said. The frequencies you produced were simple, even crude by our standards, but they activated harmonic responses in other beings that I thought were impossible. Lisa looked at these advanced beings with wonder. They were trying to understand with their minds what could only be understood with their hearts. It's not about the frequencies or the mathematics, she said gently. It's about the connection. When I play, I'm not trying to show you how clever I am or how advanced my technique has become. I'm trying to share something true about what it means to be alive, to struggle, to hope, to love, to lose. But how? The Trilaxian asked. How do you create this connection without the proper technical foundation? Lisa smiled. The same way your ancestors did it. The same way every species in this room did it before you learned to make your art perfect. You feel something real, something honest, and you let that feeling guide your expression. The technique serves the emotion, not the other way around. Veltar had been listening to this exchange with growing agitation. Finally, he could contain himself no longer. This is precisely the kind of primitive thinking that we evolved beyond, he declared. Art based on emotion is unstable, unpredictable, inferior to art based on logic and proven principles. Is it? Lisa asked. Then why is everyone in this room still thinking about my simple song instead of your perfect performances? The question struck home. Throughout the auditorium, beings were still humming fragments of Lisa's melodies, still feeling the emotional resonances she had created. The technical marvels they had witnessed earlier were already fading from memory, impressive but ultimately forgettable. Because, said a new voice from the audience, Some things cannot be measured or calculated or perfected. They can only be felt. The speaker was an ancient being that few in the auditorium recognized. It moved slowly down the aisle toward the stage, its form shifting between solid and energy states. When it reached the front of the auditorium, Coordinator Zento bowed deeply. "Elder Prime," he said with reverence, "we did not know you were attending the competition." The Elder Prime looked up at Lisa on the stage. "I came because I sensed something important was happening here. Something that might change the course of our entire civilization." "And what is that, Elder?" Veltar asked, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. The Elder Prime turned to address the entire assembly. "This young human has reminded us of what we lost when we became obsessed with perfection. She has shown us that the most powerful art comes not from the mind alone, but from the marriage of mind and heart, technique and emotion, achievement and meaning." "What are you suggesting?" Zento asked. "I am suggesting," the Elder Prime replied, "that we declare this human the winner of the contest of worthiness. Not because her technique is superior, but because she has achieved something far more important than technical mastery. She has created art that transforms not only the artist, but everyone who experiences it." The auditorium erupted in discussion as beings throughout the space debated this unprecedented decision. Lisa stood on the stage, overwhelmed by what was happening around her. She had come here hoping to avoid embarrassing humanity. Now she was being declared the winner of a competition she had never thought she could win. But the real victory was not the formal recognition. It was the change she could see in the faces around her, the awakening of something that had been sleeping in the hearts of advanced civilizations for far too long. 3 months later, Lisa stood in what had once been a storage bay on Kepler 7. Now it was something entirely different. The walls had been painted with murals created by artists from dozens of different worlds. But these were not the cold technical displays she had seen when she first arrived. These paintings showed emotion, told stories, captured moments of joy and sorrow and hope. In the center of the room, a mixed group of beings sat in a circle. A young Trilaxian was learning to play a simple wooden flute while an elderly resonant taught her the breathing techniques that came from the heart rather than from mathematical formulas. A gas giant dweller was working with a human painter, learning how to express the beauty of energy dances without losing their emotional impact. This was the Galactic Center for Emotional Arts, and Lisa Rodriguez was its first director. "How are our new students doing?" Captain Morrison asked as he entered the room. Jake had been promoted to station commander after the success of the cultural exchange, but he still checked on Lisa's progress regularly. "Better than I ever hoped," Lisa replied, watching a group of young beings from different species working together on a collaborative song. Yesterday, the Zephyrian student actually cried during her performance. I don't think she had ever let herself feel that deeply before. It had not been an easy transformation. After the Elder Prime declared Lisa the winner of the contest of worthiness, the Galactic Cultural Exchange had been thrown into chaos. Half the delegates celebrated the decision, recognizing that something important had been rediscovered. The other half, led by Cultural Minister Veltar, argued that the competition had been corrupted by primitive thinking. The debate had lasted for weeks. Formal challenges were filed, appeals were made, and diplomatic tensions rose to dangerous levels. Some species threatened to withdraw from the Galactic Alliance entirely, rather than accept that emotional art could be superior to technical perfection. But slowly, quietly, something else had been happening. Individual beings from across the galaxy had begun seeking out human artists. They wanted to understand what they had experienced in that auditorium, wanted to learn how to feel their art again instead of just performing it. The breakthrough had come when the elder, Trilaxian, who had spoken during Lisa's performance, approached Ambassador Sullivan with a request. He wanted to learn the old songs of his people, the ones that had been forgotten when mathematics replaced melody. Other elderly beings followed, each carrying memories of their species' artistic origins that had been buried under centuries of technical advancement. The young ones are easier to teach, Lisa told Jake, as they walked through the center. They haven't spent as long forgetting how to feel. But the older students, the ones who remember what their art used to be like, they're the most rewarding to work with. They passed the practice room where Maya Patel was teaching a mixed class of different species how to use movement to express emotion. The students looked awkward at first, their bodies unused to moving without technical precision, but gradually they began to find their own rhythms. "Any word from Veltar?" Jake asked. Lisa's expression grew more serious. "He's still fighting the new programs. Last week he filed another formal complaint with the Galactic Council, claiming that we're corrupting the artistic achievements of civilized species." "And how did the council respond?" "They asked him to explain why enrollment in our programs is increasing every day while attendance at traditional artistic academies is dropping," Lisa replied with a small smile. Hard to argue with results. The truth was that the impact of Lisa's performance had spread far beyond Kepler-7. Recordings of her simple guitar music had been transmitted across the galaxy, and everywhere they went, beings found themselves remembering things they thought they had lost forever. Ancient songs began to be sung again on worlds where music had become purely mathematical. Traditional dances were revived by species who had replaced movement with technological displays. "The resonance have been the biggest surprise," Lisa said as they entered her office. The room was simple and comfortable, with windows that looked out over the station's alien gardens. "I thought they would be the hardest to reach because they're literally made of crystal. But it turns out their rigid structure makes them incredibly sensitive to emotional vibrations. Some of them are creating the most beautiful music I've ever heard." Jake sat down across from her desk. "And the humans? How are Carlos and Maya adjusting to their new roles?" "They love it," Lisa said. "Carlos is running the visual arts program, teaching aliens how to paint from the heart instead of from formulas. Maya is revolutionizing dance instruction across 6 different species. Even the gas giant dwellers are learning to express emotion through movement." There was a knock on the office door, and Coordinator Zintel entered. His pale blue skin was brighter than Lisa had ever seen it, and there was something different about his manner, more relaxed, more alive. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I wanted to share some news with you." "Of course," Lisa replied. "What's happening?" "The Galactic Council has reached a decision about the future of cultural education," Zintel said, clearly excited. "They're establishing centers like this one on 12 different worlds, with human instructors leading the emotional arts programs." Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. 12 worlds? "Demand is higher than we ever anticipated," Zintel explained. "Species that haven't participated in cultural exchanges for centuries are requesting admission to the new programs. We need humans to help teach them what you've taught us." Jake whistled softly. "That's going to require a lot of people." "Earth has already agreed to provide instructors," Zintel continued. "Your planet's education system is being restructured to include courses on interspecies emotional communication. Within 5 years, you'll be graduating teachers who specialize in helping alien species reconnect with their artistic origins." Lisa stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where beings from dozens of worlds now gathered to share stories and songs. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago she had been playing guitar in subway stations, hoping for enough coins to buy dinner. "There's something else," Zintel said quietly. "Cultural Minister Veltar has requested a private meeting with you." Lisa turned back to face him. "Really? What does he want?" "I think," Zintel said with a slight smile, "he wants to learn how to feel his music again." That evening, Lisa sat in the same practice room where she had prepared for her first performance on Kepler-7, but now she was not alone. Veltar sat across from her, his elegant form looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I have been watching your students," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I have seen what they achieve when they combine technique with emotion, and I have realized that in my pursuit of perfection, I lost something essential." Lisa nodded encouragingly. "It's not lost forever. It's just buried under years of training and expectations. Can you teach me? Veltar asked, and there was genuine humility in his voice. Can you help me remember what my people's music used to sound like? Lisa picked up her guitar, the same instrument that had started this whole transformation. I can't teach you to feel, Veltar. That's something you already know how to do. I can just help you remember that it's okay to let those feelings guide your art. She began to play a simple melody, one of the first songs her grandfather had taught her. As the notes filled the room, she watched Veltar's face change. The rigid control he had maintained for centuries began to crack, and underneath it, she could see the being he had been before he learned to fear imperfection. Now you try, Lisa said. Offering him a basic stringed instrument from her collection, Veltar took the instrument with trembling hands. He had not played anything so simple in hundreds of years. But as he began to pluck the strings, something magical happened. The mathematical precision that had defined his art for so long gave way to something more honest, more real. The melody that emerged was not perfect. It had rough edges and uncertain moments. But it also had something that his technically flawless performances had never possessed. It had a soul. Lisa smiled as she listened to the Zephian minister rediscover the joy of making music for its own sake rather than for the approval of others. Around the galaxy, similar transformations were happening as beings remembered that the most powerful art comes not from the mind alone, but from the marriage of skill and heart. The question that had haunted Lisa since her arrival at Kepler 7 had finally been answered. How good was she really? Good enough to change the galaxy's understanding of what art could be. Good enough to remind advanced civilizations that the simplest truths are often the most profound. Good enough to prove that sometimes the most powerful performances come from the heart of a young street musician with an old guitar and the courage to be authentically human.